I'm Kenny Captures.
History Through My Lens, Episode 4. The Birth of Brooklyn, Farms, Ferries, and a Growing Community. I'm Kenny Captures, and welcome back to History Through My Lens. In our last episode, we explored who lived on this land before Brooklyn existed. We followed the story from the first native peoples who called this region home, through the arrival of European explorers, and into the establishment of the Maryland colony. But once the land had been claimed, what happened next? How did forests become farms? Who were the people who lived and worked here? What role did the Patapsco River play in shaping this landscape? And how did these early settlements prepare the way for the Brooklyn neighborhood we know today? Today we're traveling back to the late 1600s and following this story through the 1700s and into the early 1800s. This was a time of determination, hardship, opportunity, and change. It was a time that forever reshaped the land surrounding the Patapsco River. Let's begin. By the late 1600s, the land surrounding present-day Brooklyn remained a rugged and heavily forested frontier. Dense hardwood forests stretched for miles in every direction. Towering oak, chestnut, hickory, walnut, and tulip poplar trees covered the hillsides. The Patapsco River flowed quietly toward the Chesapeake Bay, while wetlands along its shoreline supported fish, oysters, crabs, turtles, and countless species of birds. White-tailed deer wandered through the forests. Wild turkeys searched beneath the trees. Foxes, beavers, and other wildlife were common throughout the region. Although native peoples had lived here for thousands of years, European settlement was slowly transforming the landscape. The families arriving here weren't looking to build towns, they were looking to build lives. Everything they needed had to come from the land itself. Before a single crop could be planted, the wilderness had to be cleared. Using little more than iron axes, hand saws, wedges, horses, and determination, settlers began cutting forests that had stood for centuries. The work was slow. Every tree that fell revealed another. Branches were burned, logs were cut into lumber, tree stumps were dug from the earth by hand. Rocks were removed one by one. Only after months of exhausting labor could the first fields be planted. Little by little, the forests gave way to farmland. Simple log cabins appeared across the countryside. Built from timber harvested only a few yards away, these homes usually contained 1 or 2 rooms. A stone chimney provided heat during the winter. Small windows allowed just enough sunlight inside. Furniture was handmade. Candles lit the evenings. Water came from nearby springs, streams, or hand-dug wells. Life revolved around survival. There was no electricity, no running water, no supermarkets, no hospitals nearby. Families depended on what they could grow, raise, hunt, fish, or make with their own hands. Corn quickly became one of the colony's most important crops because it fed both people and livestock. As the 1700s progressed, wheat became increasingly valuable throughout Maryland. Vegetable gardens surrounded many homes. Orchards produced apples, peaches, pears, and cherries. Livestock grazed in fenced pastures. Cows supplied milk. Chickens provided eggs. Pigs were raised for meat. Every member of the household worked. Even young children gathered firewood, carried water, fed animals, and helped tend the fields. Life followed the rhythm of the seasons. Spring brought planting. Summer brought long days beneath the hot sun. Autumn became a race to harvest enough food before winter arrived. Winter was spent repairing tools, preserving food, cutting firewood, and preparing for another year. Life demanded constant work. As more land was claimed throughout the late 1600s and into the 1700s, the need for labor continued to increase. Not all of that work was done by the families who owned the land. Across colonial Maryland, many farms relied on the forced labor of enslaved Africans, while others relied on indentured servants whose labor was bound by contracts for a set number of years. Enslaved men, women, and children were forced to clear forests, remove stumps, split timber, build fences, construct homes and barns, plant and harvest crops, care for livestock, and perform countless other forms of labor. Some worked as skilled carpenters. Others became blacksmiths, brickmakers, boatmen, or craftsmen. Their lives were shaped by forced labor and the denial of their freedom. Although many of their names were never recorded, they were part of the history of this land. As the years passed, more families settled along the Patapsco River. What had once been scattered homesteads slowly became connected communities. No one living here could have imagined what the future held. But with every field that was cleared, every crop that was planted, every cabin that was built, and every generation that called this place home, the landscape surrounding present-day Brooklyn was beginning a transformation that would continue for centuries. As the farms continued to spread across the countryside, one natural feature connected nearly every part of life: the Patapsco River. Long before railroads crossed Maryland, long before highways connected communities, and long before bridges stretched across these waters, the Patapsco was the region's lifeline. For the people living here, the river was more than water. It was their highway. It was their marketplace. It was their connection to the outside world. Throughout the early 1700s, farmers loaded small sailboats, canoes, rowboats, and flat-bottomed bateaux with wheat, corn, tobacco, timber, firewood, livestock, and other goods produced on their farms. Those boats traveled down the Patapsco River toward growing ports and trading landings, where crops and supplies were exchanged for tools, iron, cloth, sugar, and other necessities that couldn't be produced at home. Traveling by water was often much faster than traveling over land. The roads that did exist were little more than narrow dirt paths cut through the forests. Heavy rain often turned them into deep mud. Wagons became stuck. Horses struggled to pull heavy loads. For many families, the river offered the easiest way to travel. Simple ferries carried people, horses, wagons, and livestock from one side of the Patapsco to the other. Some ferries were operated by private landowners. Others served regular river crossings used by nearby communities. The Patapsco also provided food. Families fished for perch, shad, herring, catfish, and rockfish. Watermen harvested oysters from the riverbed. Crabs were gathered from the marshes and shoreline. For generations, these waters sustained the people who lived here. As trade continued to grow, the settlements along the Patapsco became more closely connected. Then, in 1729, another important milestone took place. The town of Baltimore was officially established on the north side of the Patapsco River. At first, it was a small settlement. Few could have imagined what it would one day become, but its location along deep water made it an ideal place for ships to load and unload cargo. As the decades passed, more merchants arrived. More warehouses were built. More ships entered the harbor. Trade expanded year after year. The farms surrounding present-day Brooklyn became increasingly connected to this growing town. Farmers transported wheat, livestock, timber, and other products toward Baltimore, while manufactured goods made their way back into the countryside. The river carried more than supplies. It carried news, ideas, people, and opportunity. But it also carried hardship. Enslaved Africans continued arriving in Maryland during the 18th century. Some were brought through Baltimore before being forced onto farms, plantations, workshops, and households throughout the colony. Others worked along the waterfront, loading cargo, repairing ships, making barrels, laying brick, and practicing skilled trades while living under slavery. At the same time, Baltimore's free black population slowly began to grow. Some people gained their freedom through manumission. Others purchased their freedom. Some were born free. Despite facing discrimination and restrictive laws, free black Marylanders established families, worked in skilled trades, worshipped together, and began building communities that would continue growing in the years ahead. By the 1770s, the region surrounding the Patapsco River had changed dramatically from what earlier settlers first encountered. The forests had been pushed back, the farms had grown larger, trade moved steadily along the river, and the town of Baltimore was becoming one of the most important ports in the American colonies. Yet another chapter in American history was about to begin, one that would affect every community along the Patapsco River: the American Revolution. In 1775, the American Revolutionary War began. The fighting lasted for 8 years, ending in 1783 with American independence. Although no major battles were fought on the land that would one day become Brooklyn, the war changed the future of Maryland. Farmers continued planting and harvesting their crops. Boats continued moving along the Patapsco River. Families continued working to survive. But beyond these quiet shores, a new nation was taking shape. After the war ended in 1783, the United States entered a period of rapid growth. Trade expanded, new businesses opened. People continued moving into Maryland in search of opportunity. The town of Baltimore grew alongside the new nation. By 1797, Baltimore had grown so rapidly that it was officially incorporated as the City of Baltimore. Its harbor became one of the busiest on the East Coast. Ships arrived carrying goods from across the Atlantic and the Caribbean. Others departed loaded with flour, grain, tobacco, timber, and manufactured products destined for ports around the world. As Baltimore expanded, its influence reached farther into the surrounding countryside. The farms along the Patapsco River found larger markets for their crops. Roads became busier. River traffic increased. New businesses appeared throughout the region. As the 1800s began, life continued to change. More families settled the countryside. Churches became centers of worship and community life. Blacksmith shops repaired wagons, horseshoes, and farming equipment. Water-powered mills ground wheat into flour that could be shipped through Baltimore's harbor. The countryside remained largely rural, but it was no longer isolated. At the same time, slavery continued throughout Maryland. Enslaved African men, women, and children remained on farms, worked in homes, labored along the waterfront, and practiced skilled trades throughout the region. Meanwhile, Baltimore's free black community continued to grow. Despite facing discrimination and unequal treatment under the law, free black Marylanders established churches, schools, businesses, and mutual aid organizations that strengthened their communities and created opportunities for future generations. The story of this region was becoming more complex. It was a story of growth, opportunity, hard work, and injustice existing side by side. By the 1820s, the landscape surrounding present-day Brooklyn looked very different from the wilderness that settlers encountered more than a century earlier. The forests had been pushed back. Open fields stretched across the countryside. Roads connected farms that had once stood alone. The Patapsco River remained filled with boats carrying people and goods between the countryside and Baltimore. Generation after generation had reshaped this land, and although few people realized it at the time, the next transformation was already beginning. The quiet farming communities along the Patapsco River were about to enter a new chapter, one that would forever change the history of Brooklyn. As the 1830s gave way to the 1840s, the pace of change continued to accelerate. The Patapsco River remained at the center of everyday life. Boats carried lumber, grain, flour, oysters, coal, and countless other goods between the surrounding countryside and the port of Baltimore. The roads that had once been little more than narrow dirt paths became busier each year. Farmers traveled to market, merchants carried supplies, families moved into the region looking for new opportunities. The countryside surrounding present-day Brooklyn was changing. What had once been a landscape of dense forests and scattered homesteads had become a network of farms, roads, and growing communities. The influence of Baltimore continued to spread beyond its borders. Its population increased, its industries expanded, its waterfront became one of the busiest in the nation. As the city grew, more people began looking beyond Baltimore for places to live, work, and invest. The open land along the Patapsco River attracted new attention. Surveyors walked the countryside measuring property lines. Landowners divided large tracts into smaller parcels. Investors recognized that this land offered something valuable. It sat beside a navigable river. It was close to Baltimore, and it offered room to grow. For nearly 2 centuries, this landscape had been shaped by native peoples. European settlers, indentured servants, enslaved Africans, free black Marylanders, farmers, watermen, craftsmen, and countless families whose daily lives unfolded along the shores of the Patapsco. Every tree that had been cleared, every field that had been planted, every road that had been carved through the wilderness, every boat that had traveled these waters had become part of a much larger story. By the early 1850s, that story was about to enter an entirely new chapter. In 1853, a new town was laid out along the Patapsco River. Streets were surveyed. Building lots were offered for sale. For the first time, this growing community had an official identity. Its name was Brooklyn. But how did Brooklyn get its name? Who planned the town? Who were its first residents? And what happened after those first streets were laid out? We'll answer those questions in the next episode. I'm Kenny Captures. and this has been History Through My Lens. I'll see you in episode 5.